Hello, everybody. First and foremost, sorry for the circumstance. I am in my car. It has been a crazy week and very hard to find a quiet place to be able to do this. I am not driving, so here we are. Again, I apologize for the environment. This week on our video discussion, we were talking about several cases that were prevalent to our counseling experiences moving forward. And the case that I chose to look over and review was Bruff versus North Mississippi Health Services. To give an overview of what the case was, a Mrs. Linda Bruff was an employee of the North Mississippi Health Services. It was a hospital-based employee assistant program. She was a counselor there. As a counselor in the program, she counseled many patients, but one patient in particular who entered the court case went by the name of Jane Doe. That's all she gave out. Told Miss Bruff that she was a homosexual and in a homosexual relationship. And she wanted Linda Bruff to counsel her onto how to have a better relationship, better connect with her partner, and walk through that. Miss Linda Bruff explained to the patient, to the client, that she was religious and her religious background prevented her from being able to discuss and enforce that type of relationship. Miss Jane Doe left and came back later on and had another session that she never showed up for, but then complained to the North Mississippi Health Services about Mrs. Bruff's services and refusal to help her. The employer went to the counselor and asked them why they refused, and then requested to have that individual transferred to another counselor. And Mrs. Bruff explained that because of her religious preferences, she was not going to counsel anyone of homosexual persuasion, anyone who was having relationships outside of marriage, and a series of other circumstances. The employer was then burdened at that point because Mrs. Bruff had tried to push off several clients onto other counselors within the organization. So obviously she couldn't continue in the capacity she was in, and the organization tried to move her to another position so that she wouldn't be faced with what she felt was an ethical dilemma on her part. They couldn't place her in another position and subsequently had to let her go because her position prevented her from being able to fulfill her role as a counselor. Mrs. Linda Bruff sued at that point and won the initial case. They ruled towards the plaintiff, Mrs. Bruff, that she was being discriminated against for her religious preferences. Then the case itself was reviewed, and in the review, the case was overturned and given back to the North Mississippi Health Services. The law decided that the North Mississippi Health Services had not gone against Mrs. Bruff's religious beliefs, that the employer was not required to accommodate her beliefs because Miss Linda Bruff was imposing undue hardship on the employer. Because the employers are responsible to accommodate religious beliefs unless doing so causes undue hardship. That's under Title VII of the court case, which is why it was redone. The employer went above and beyond and tried to even relocate her to another part of the job, but was unable to do so. So that was the court case as a whole. How does that court case impact my work as a professional counselor? Well, very specifically, one of the main things that Mrs. Linda Bruff did wrong was she did not disclose her own personal preferences, neither to the client that she was serving at all, nor did she disclose that to her employer before she was employed. She waited until she was in a client-counselor relationship and then refused to provide those services to the client. The A code of ethics is very clear. You are supposed to provide competent care, avoiding all harm. And in order to do so, a counselor must be able to bracket their personal beliefs in order to help benefit the client itself. This case shows a perfect example of an individual counselor doing wrong by refusing to form those barriers at the very beginning. It reinforces that personal beliefs do not override a client's welfare. Your job as a helper is to help the individual. Their worldview, their background, their personal beliefs are theirs, and you're supposed to work with them to help them through their circumstances. Miss Linda Bruff did not do that. Next question we talked about was what defaults, religious beliefs, or personal values regarding sexual orientation or identity do I possess, and how might I mitigate those when working with an LGBTQ client? Well, I am a follower of Christ, and part of my faith is structured on the idea of my own personal identity is taken off of me, and I accept and take on the yoke or burden of the identity of Christ. That is my worldview. That is my attempt to live in this world. And doing so requires the removal and putting away of several aspects of who I am as a person in order to follow what I am mandated to be. At the same time, Paul himself in 1 Corinthians chapter 5 states, "Who am I to judge those outside of the faith? Am I not to judge those in the faith?" Meaning specifically that as a Christian, I have accepted that worldview. Anybody who hasn't accepted that worldview is not bound by the laws of my personal belief, and nor do I have the right to judge that individual for their choices. As far as working with an LGBTQ client, though my own personal beliefs on how I live my life is clear, that has nothing to do with the individual that I'd be working with. And foundationally built within my faith is a direct answer to how I would do that. I'm supposed to be bracketing my personal beliefs anyway to people who follow the path that I follow. I wouldn't have any issue working with LGBTQ clients. I think there's a lot that I would need to do research and understanding wise when it comes specifically to transgenderism. That is a part of that grouping that I do not have a lot of information on. That's very new to me. And being at the theater, I've had to read and research and try to understand that community a little better because again, that's new. So I think in that aspect, I would move forward trying to understand more and ensure that when I am working with a client in the future, that I would be able to continue to bracket my personal beliefs in order to help that client meet what they need in their session. Keep my focus as a helper to an individual, that I am able to provide that competent care while avoiding harm. Thank you so much for listening, and I can't wait to hear some feedback.